See waves crashing against the shore of Daytona Beach, a sound that has become my daily companion for the past 3 years. 75 is the age when you begin to appreciate consistency. My home is only 3 blocks from the ocean, small but cozy. I've never aspired to luxury, though I could afford it. Saving money has been second nature to me since my youth, when my parents were barely making ends meet. My name is 3 years when the only sound in the house was my voice talking to the pictures of Hilda spread throughout the rooms. Morning coffee would never again taste as good as it did when made by her hands. Hilda was my anchor, my compass, my North Star. She had a knack for making the house a place I wanted to return to. Unlike our daughter Prudence, or Prue as she prefers to be called. Prue is 47 years old and is the complete opposite of everything Hilda and I believed in. We taught her the value of knowledge, labor, and thrift. Instead, she grew up with the belief that the world owed her everything by birthright. I stood up from the veranda chair, feeling a familiar ache in my knees. Arthritis is the inevitable companion of old age. The inside of the house was almost exactly the same as it had been when Hilda was there. I hadn't found the energy to change things, although the therapist I'd seen since her death had strongly recommended it. Renew your environment, Professor Glover. It will help you move on, she used to say. But how can you move on when half your heart is in the past? I sank into the chair by the window where I always sat checking student papers and looked at my phone. Prue hadn't called in 2 weeks, which was atypical. She usually showed up every week, like a schedule. Not to ask about my health or to tell me about her children, my grandchildren, whom I'd only seen on Christmas cards, but to ask for money. The last time it was to pay for repairs to her new SUV. Before that, it was for an urgent kitchen makeover. And before that, for a vital vacation to the Bahamas, because she needed to recuperate from stress at work. It's amazing how being a coordinator at a real estate firm can be so stressful. Every time I gave in, each time I saw the disappointment in Hilda's eyes in the pictures around me. "You're too soft on her, Rupert," she often said. And each time I replied, "She's our daughter, Hilda. Who will help her if not us?" But Hilda's gone, and I am beginning to realize that she was right. My giving in didn't help Prue. It only reinforced her belief that she was entitled to my money. My gaze fell on a bookshelf where an old shabby atlas of Europe stood. I reached over and took it down, flipping through the bookmarked pages. Evidence of the evenings spent with Hilda planning the trip we'd always put off. First because of Prue's birth, then my career, then Prue's college, then her wedding. There was always a reason to put off our dreams for another year, another 5 years. And now Hilda's gone, and I'm left alone with savings we never spent on ourselves. I'm 75 years old, my knees are hurting more and more, and the doctor recently noticed something suspicious on my last lung x-ray. "Nothing serious, Professor Glover, but worth watching," he said. But I've lived long enough to know, time is not on my side. At that moment, looking at the bookmarks in the atlas marking Paris, Rome, Venice, and Prague, I made a decision. I'm going on this trip, alone, for Hilda and for myself, while I still can. The planning took 2 weeks. I contacted travel agent Esther Quinlan, an elderly lady who specialized in tours for the older generation. Together, we put together an itinerary for the month. Comfortable, but including all the cities Hilda and I dreamed of visiting. "It will cost you about $35,000, Mr. Glover, taking into account good hotels and individual excursions," Esther said, slightly nervous about the amount. "That's money to spend, Esther," I replied with a phrase I'd never uttered before. "Book everything. I want to go in a month." When I got home from my meeting with Esther, Prue was there waiting for me. Her look always said, "Why don't you move into a nursing home and give this house to me?" "I'm planning a trip around Europe." I braced myself for her reaction. "Traveling? At your age? Alone?" She laughed as if I'd said something absurd. "Yes, Prue, at my age. And yes, alone, since your mom, unfortunately, can't keep me company." I rarely let sarcasm creep into my voice, but today it was hard to hold back. Prue ignored the mention of her mother and made her way into the living room, sinking into my chair, the same one where I read every night. "And how much is this going to cost?" There it was, the question that always interested her most. "About 35,000, I answered honestly. The expression on her face changed instantly. Shock, then anger. 35,000? You're going to spend $35,000 on tourism. She said the last word as if she were talking about something obscene. Yes, Prue, I am. It's a trip your mother and I have dreamed of for 40 years. It's worth it. But this is crazy. You're 75 years old, Dad. Why spend so much money now? Precisely because I'm 75 and I don't know how much time I have left. That's selfish. You could have, could have what? Give that money to you? I was surprised at my own bluntness. Prue blushed, but not with shame, with anger. I'm your daughter. I have kids who need to pay for college. And you're going to throw away $35,000 on a trip you might not even come back from. My grandchildren aren't even in high school yet, Prue. They're at least 6 years away from college. And I'm paying for their private school tuition, in case you've forgotten. That's not the same thing. You've been saving all your life. And for what? To squander it all before you die? Her words hit harder than I expected. At 47, Prue was already planning my death and how she would dispose of my money. I've been saving to provide for my old age and help you get back on your feet. I paid for your college, your wedding, helped with the down payment on your house. I continue to help you every month. But that money is mine, Prue, and I have the right to spend some of it on things that matter to me. But 35,000, that's part of my inheritance. There it was, the word she never said outright, but which always hovered between us. Inheritance. My death as a financial gain. Your inheritance? My voice went quiet, which only happened when I was truly angry. Prue, you're talking about the money I earned by saving from every paycheck, denying myself a new car or vacation so you could have everything you need. That money isn't yours. It'll be yours when I'm gone, if I so choose. If you so choose, her voice rose an octave. What does that mean? Are you threatening to disinherit me? For what? For worrying about you and your reckless spending? You're not worried about me, Prue. You're worried about money. How dare you? I come to visit you. I call you. You come when you need money. You call when you need money. When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling? When was the last time you took me out to dinner or brought me grandchildren? Prue stood up, her face contorted with anger. You old, ungrateful egomaniac. All your life you've been like that. Only your work, your books, your students mattered. Even Mom was in the background. This was too much. Mentioning Hilda in that context made me rise to my feet, despite the pain in my knees. Don't you dare talk about your mother like that. She's always come first for me, and you know it. Oh, really? Then why did you never take a trip to that lauded Europe in her lifetime? Because you were sorry for the money. And now that she's dead, you suddenly decide to spend $35,000 on a trip? Where's the logic, Dad? I clenched my fists, trying to contain my anger. We put off the trip because we always put your needs first, Prue. College, the wedding, helping with the house. All of those things were more important than our dreams. Your mother and I decided that, together. Don't try to blame me for you and Mom not living life to the fullest. It's your choice. Yes, our choice. Just like my current decision is my choice. I'm going on this journey, Prue, with or without your blessing. Prue looked at me for a few long seconds, then grabbed her purse. Fine, spend your money, but don't come to me when you're left penniless in a nursing home because you blew it all on stupid trips. I've never come to you for money, Prue, and I won't. You know what? Maybe you should be declared incompetent. You're obviously out of your mind if you're willing to throw away that kind of money. She headed for the door. Those are empty threats, Prue. I'm sane, and any doctor will attest to that. She turned around in the doorway, and her gaze burned through me. We'll see about that. I need that money more than you need it for your whims. It's my inheritance, and I won't let you squander it. The door slammed shut with such force that Hilda's picture on the wall swayed. I walked over and corrected it, looking into her kindred eyes. What have we done, Hilda? Where have we gone wrong? I whispered. But the photograph was silent, as always, and only Hilda's eyes seemed to express the same sadness I felt. I turned back to the window and watched Prue drive away in her brand new SUV that I'd helped her pay for 3 months ago. $35,000 for a trip seemed like a crazy expense to her, but $60,000 for a premium car seemed like a perfectly reasonable investment. At that moment, I made another decision. I'm not just going on this trip. I'm going to revise my will. Prue's threats were out of line, and I could no longer ignore the truth. My daughter only saw me as a money bag. The phone rang, and Esther Quinlan's name popped up on the screen. Mr. Glover, good news. I've booked all the hotels for you, and the flights are confirmed. You'll be leaving on May 25th. Thank you, Esther. That's exactly what I need to hear right now. For the first time in the 3 years since Hilda's death, I felt something akin to anticipation. I was going to realize our dream, albeit alone, but with her in my heart. And no amount of Prue's threats could stop that from happening. At least that's what I thought at the time. After Prue left, I sat in silence for a long time, looking at the tattered atlas in my lap. My daughter's threats echoed in my ears, but they didn't shake my resolve. Rather, they strengthened it. In the morning, I called my longtime friend and attorney, Vernon Page, to set up an appointment to review the will. For the first time in years, I felt the need to protect myself from my own child. I spent the next few days in pleasantries preparing for the trip. I made a list of necessary items, updated my closet, buying a few lightweight shirts and comfortable shoes for long walks. My old suitcase, which had survived dozens of academic conferences, was retrieved from the pantry and thoroughly cleaned. At the bottom, I found an address tag in Hilda's handwriting, a memory of our last trip to Boston together 6 years ago. Going through the books I wanted to take with me, I came across an old photo album. I sat down on the couch and began flipping through the pages, traveling back in time. Here's Prue, newborn, so tiny in Hilda's arms. Here she is, 3 years old, laughing, sitting on my shoulders in the park. Here's 5-year-old Prue with an enthusiastic expression on her face opening her Christmas present, a book of fairy tales that I myself read as a child. When did it all go wrong? I turned the page. Prue in elementary school, already with a scowl on her face, arms crossed over her chest. Standing next to her were the other kids, the children of doctors, lawyers, and businessmen, dressed in expensive clothes. Hilda and I had always tried to give Prue everything she needed, but never indulged in excessive whims. We're teaching her to appreciate what she has, rather than strive for what she doesn't have, Hilda would often say when Prue began to whine for another fancy toy or clothes like all the other kids. Perhaps the problem began to form right then in elementary school, where Prue compared herself to children from more affluent families. We lived modestly. The professor's salary was never huge, and Hilda worked as a school teacher. We saved money rather than spending it on ostentatious luxuries. But it seems that for Prue, material possessions had become the measure of success and happiness too soon. I continued flipping through the album. Prue's adolescence was marked by constant arguments about money, clothes, and party permits. She began to call our house pathetic, our cars shabby, and our lifestyle boring. Hilda was hurt by these words more than I was. I saw education and knowledge as the main wealth, and material possessions as secondary. Hilda, on the other hand, wanted her daughter to love her home and take pride in it. College only exacerbated the problem. Prue chose a prestigious university, much more expensive than we could afford, but we didn't want to limit her ambitions. We took out an additional mortgage on the house to pay for her tuition. Hilda took a second job. I took extra hours and summer courses. Our own trip to Europe was postponed again. But instead of gratitude, Prue would come home with stories of her friends' lavish vacations, expensive cars, and fancy clothes she couldn't afford. And each time, she looked at us as if we had personally deprived her of all that. Turning another page of the album, I saw a picture from her college graduation. Prue in her gown between me and Hilda, with a strained smile. That day she told us, "I hope now I can finally live like a normal person." It was a strange phrase, as if 4 years at an expensive college had been a deprivation rather than a privilege for her. After college, she married Clarence Witt, a man with similarly material ambitions. Clarence worked in real estate and was always talking about great deals and new opportunities, but those opportunities never seemed to materialize into actual financial success. Nevertheless, they bought homes they couldn't afford, cars they couldn't afford, and sent their kids to elite private schools. And every time their pyramid scheme threatened to collapse, Prue came to us. First it was temporary loans. Then it was just help. Then it turned into a monthly expectation that we supplement their income to support the lifestyle they chose for themselves. Hilda was always against it, but I couldn't say no to my only daughter. She's our child, Hilda. We can't let her suffer. But we're not helping her, Rupert, Hilda replied. We are encouraging irresponsibility. She will never learn to live within her means. Hilda was right, as always. And now, 3 years after her death, I was reaping the fruits of my weakness. Prue didn't just expect my money, she considered it hers by right. Closing the album, I walked to the window. My thoughts returned to my last conversation with my daughter. Her threats to declare me incompetent seemed empty. But what if she really tried? Would my own daughter really be willing to do such a thing just to get control of my finances? I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Vernon. My old friend answered after the second ringtone. Vernon, it's Rupert. I'd like to reschedule our meeting for an earlier date, if possible. The situation may be more serious than I thought. 2 days later, I was sitting in Vernon's office, telling him about my conversation with Prue. He listened attentively, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I remembered from when we were students together. Rupert, I don't want to scare you, but cases like this are not uncommon. Children try to gain control of their elderly parents' finances, especially if there's a significant amount involved. But to declare you incompetent, you need serious evidence. Dementia, mental illness, inability to make rational decisions. Which she doesn't have, I said confidently. Exactly. However, it's worth preparing for. I recommend you get a full medical examination and a report on your mental state. That will be helpful if the case does go to trial. You think she'll actually sue? I still couldn't believe my daughter was capable of such a thing. I hope she doesn't, but you better be prepared. Vernon was right. I made an appointment with my therapist, Dr. Elijah Sherman, explaining the situation. She was shocked but agreed to help and referred me to a neurologist and psychiatrist for additional evaluations. I spent the next 2 weeks going from one medical office to another. The MRI showed only age-related changes consistent with my 75 years. A psychiatric evaluation confirmed that I was fully capable and had no cognitive impairment. Dr. Sherman compiled all the results and prepared a detailed report. Professor Glover, by all accounts, you are in excellent shape for your age. No signs of dementia or other cognitive impairment. Your memory function is excellent. You are fully oriented in space and time, and your decision-making ability is unquestionable. I thanked her and picked up copies of all the paperwork for Vernon. On the way home, I reflected on how absurd the situation was. I had to prove my sanity because of my own daughter's threats. At home, I continued my travel preparations with renewed vigor. Now that the medical issues were resolved, I could focus on the pleasant details. I made a list of books I wanted to reread during the trip, selected pictures of Hilda to take with me. On the morning of the 22nd, 3 days before departure, the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood a young man in a strict suit. Professor Rupert Glover? He asked in an official tone. Yes, that's me. You will need to sign for receipt of these documents. He handed me a folder. With a heavy heart, I opened it just after the courier left. Inside was a court notice. Prue Whitney Glover had filed a petition to declare me incompetent and appoint her guardian of my estate. Grounds: unreasonable waste of funds likely to result in the total impoverishment of the respondent and signs of senile dementia. I sank into the chair, feeling my hands shaking. It's one thing to make threats, and quite another to actually do it. My own daughter was trying to take away my right to manage my own money. Money I'd earned through decades of hard work. You'll have, otherwise the judge might rule against you for failure to appear. Then I'll come back if I have to, but I won't let her ruin my plans. Hanging up the phone, I looked over the paperwork one more time. Prue had described me as someone who was losing touch with reality, spending money recklessly, unable to make rational decisions. She mentioned my obsessive desire to spend a huge sum on a meaningless trip as proof of my incapacity. I felt an attack of anger like I had never felt in my life. How dare she? How dare she call my dream, a dream I shared with her mother, meaningless? How dare she call me incompetent just because I chose to spend my own money differently than she would have liked? Barely calming down, I began methodically gathering documents that could help my case. Bank statements confirming Prue's regular large transfers, records of the financial assistance I'd given her over the years, college, a wedding, a down payment on a house, repairs, cars, private school for the grandchildren. It all added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. As I worked on the documents, I couldn't help but think about how Hilda and I had raised such a person. We always tried to instill in her the values we thought were important: honesty, hard work, respect for others. Where did we go wrong? Maybe we were too soft, too accommodating. Or was the problem deeper? A society that teaches children that material success is more important than anything else. I remembered an incident when Prue was 14. She came home in tears because all her friends had expensive designer jeans and she didn't. Hilda explained to her that we couldn't afford that kind of spending and suggested that we look together for good jeans at a more reasonable price. She cried and promised it would never happen again. We believed her. Maybe that was our first mistake, showing her that she could get away with her actions if she reacted emotionally enough. Or maybe the problem went even deeper, back to early childhood. Prue was our only child, a long-awaited miracle after years of unsuccessful attempts. Perhaps we overprotected her, allowed her too much, didn't teach her enough to deny herself things. Whatever the reasons, the result was before my eyes. A subpoena from my own daughter accusing me of incapacity to gain control of my money. It was painful. Betrayal is always painful, but betrayal from someone you've loved and cherished your whole life, someone you've sacrificed your dreams and desires for, is a whole other level of pain. I looked at Hilda's picture. "What would you do now, dear?" I asked aloud, even though I knew there would be no answer. But I could imagine what she would say. Hilda had always been stronger than me, more determined. "Fight it, Rupert. Don't let her take over you. You deserve your dreams." I nodded as if responding to her unspoken advice. Yes, I would fight. For too long, I'd let Prue manipulate me with guilt and family obligations. For too long, I'd put my own dreams on hold, indulging her endless demands. Not anymore. I'll go on this trip as planned, and then I'll come back and meet her in court. And there I'll finally say everything I've been holding in for so long. I called Vernon again. "Are you sure you want to go?" he asked when I confirmed my plans. "Absolutely. I'm not going to let her dictate how I live my life. Not this time." "Good. I'll try to reschedule the hearing. If it doesn't work out, just be ready to come back." "Thanks, Vernon. You're a true friend." Finished with the conversation, I went back to packing. There was a new determination in my movements now. How she dreamed of seeing a sunset over the Seine in Paris, over the Tiber in Rome. Now I'll see them for both of us. The phone rang, breaking my musings. It was Vernon. "Rupert, I have news. I can't tell if it's good or bad, but the court hearing is set for June 7th, 2 weeks after you leave." "That's good, I think. I'll be back in time for that." "Yes, but there's one more thing. I got a copy of all the paperwork Prue filed. She doesn't just want control of your finances, Rupert. She's asking the court for a temporary restraining order against any major spending until a judgment is rendered." "What? She can't do that." "She can try. The court is due to consider that motion in the next few days. If it's granted, you won't be able to pay for your trip." I felt the blood rush from my face. Prue was really trying to do everything she could to stop me. "What can we do?" "File a counterpetition, explain that the trip has already been paid for, that canceling would result in a significant financial loss. But honestly, Rupert, the chances are slim." I squeezed the tube tighter. "Do what you can, Vernon. I'm not giving up without a fight." Hanging up the pipe, I finished my whiskey in one gulp. War had been declared. My own daughter has become my opponent in the battle for the right to control her life and her money. Well, if she wants a war, she'll get one. I spent 42 years teaching young minds how to analyze texts, find ulterior motives, and construct persuasive arguments. I was not the helpless old man she thought I was. With these thoughts in mind, I went to bed, preparing for a battle I never wanted to fight, but which I could no longer dodge. The Volusia County Courthouse, a massive gray stone structure, seemed especially unfriendly to me on that June morning. I adjusted my tie and stepped inside, where Vernon was already waiting for me. My old friend looked collected and confident in his immaculate navy blue suit. "How are you feeling?" he asked, shaking my hand firmly. "Like a man who has to sue his own daughter," I replied, trying to remain calm. My trip to Europe ended earlier than planned. I had time to visit Paris and Rome, but the news from Vernon that the court refused to reschedule the hearing for a later date caused me to cut the trip short. I returned to Daytona Beach 2 days before the scheduled date, tired from the flight, but determined to defend myself. "Remember, Rupert," Vernon spoke softly as we walked up the stairs to the courtroom. "It's important to remain calm, no matter what Prue or her attorney says. Judge Caulfield is known for his respect for the elderly, but he's also very mindful of their behavior in the courtroom." I nodded. In 42 years of teaching, I had learned to remain calm in the most tense situations. Students have sometimes been aggressive, parents have been demanding, administrators have been adamant, but this was the first time I had to defend myself against accusations of incompetence made by my own child. The courtroom was half empty. In the front row, I spotted Prue next to a man in an expensive suit. Her lawyer, I assumed. She looked impeccable. Strict business suit, perfect hair, moderate makeup. The image of a caring daughter concerned about her elderly father's condition. It was ironic. She looked in my direction but made no attempt to greet me. Her eyes, so similar to Hilda's, were cold and calculating. I felt a prick of pain. How had we gotten to this point? "All rise, the court is in session." "The Honorable Judge Jeffrey Caulfield presiding," the bailiff announced. Judge Caulfield, a man in his 60s with a penetrating gaze from beneath thick graying eyebrows, entered the hall and took his seat. After formalities and introductions of the parties, he turned to Prue's attorney. "Mr. Hayward, you may begin." Randall Hayward, a tall man with smoothly combed brown hair, rose from his seat. He moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to winning. "Your Honor, we are gathered here today on a very delicate but extremely important matter. At issue is the welfare of an elderly man who unfortunately has begun to show signs of cognitive decline, making him vulnerable to financial loss." I felt my fists clench, but by an effort of will I forced myself to relax. "Stay calm, Rupert. Stay calm. My client, Ms. Prudence Witt, has come to court not out of self-interest, but out of deep concern for her father's well-being. We will present evidence that Professor Glover is making financial decisions that are completely contrary to his previous habits of frugality." Hayward paused for a moment before continuing. "Your Honor, let me present a specific example. Professor Glover, a man who has spent his entire life saving every penny, suddenly decided to spend $35,000 on a trip to Europe. For a man of his age, such a trip is not only financially unwise, but potentially dangerous." I barely restrained myself from objecting. My health was excellent for my age, and my doctor had authorized the trip. Besides, did the fact that I had finally decided to spend some of my savings on a long-time dream make me incapacitated? Vernon presented the court with medical reports confirming my legal capacity and detailed the financial assistance I had given Prue over the past few years, over $170,000. The judge scrutinized the documents, and Prue's face visibly tensed. When it came time to testify, Prue described me as a forgetful, changed person who suddenly began spending money recklessly. She claimed that I even gave money to a gardener for some business. A pure lie, since I didn't even have a gardener. When I tried to talk to him about it, he became aggressive and accused me of going after his money. "This is completely unlike my father, as I've known him all my life," Prue stated. During cross-examination, Vernon got Prue to admit that she had gotten $60,000 from me for a new car just a few months before the trial. When he asked why she wasn't bothered by my incapacity then, she looked cornered. "It's different situations. A car is a necessity. Traveling is an excess," she replied. "Necessity for whom, Ms. Witt? For you or for your father?" Vernon parried. When it was my turn to testify, I told of my and Hilda's long-held dream of traveling to Europe, how we kept putting off the trip because of family needs, and my decision to pursue that dream while I had the chance. Prue's attorney tried to portray my decision as an irrational change of character, but I remained calm and gave reasonable answers, which clearly frustrated him. In his closing argument, Hayward insisted that my actions were a sign of cognitive decline. A man who has been thrifty all his life suddenly decides to spend a large sum on a trip in his old age. He changes his will, restricting his daughter's access to inheritance. These are not the actions of a man who thinks clearly and rationally. In response, Vernon pointed to the medical evidence and emphasized my right to dispose of my funds as I see fit. After closing arguments, the judge called a short recess to consider all the evidence. I sat in silence, realizing the gravity of the situation. My daughter, my flesh and blood, was willing to publicly vilify me, to distort the truth about my condition, just to gain control of my money. When the hearing resumed, Judge Caulfield turned to me. Professor Glover, I have carefully reviewed all the materials presented. The medical reports strongly indicate that you are fully competent, but I would like to hear from you personally. How do you account for such a significant change in your spending and relationship with your daughter? I slowly stood up, feeling the stares of everyone present. Your Honor, since my wife's death, I've been rethinking a lot of things. Hilda and I had always put aside our own desires for the good of the family. But when she was gone, I realized that our biggest dream had remained unfulfilled. As for my relationship with my daughter, I looked at Prue. They changed not because of my cognitive decline, but because of my epiphany. Judge Caulfield nodded. Thank you, Professor Glover. You may be seated. At that moment, Prue jumped up from her seat. That old man is spending all the money he doesn't deserve. Her voice was ringing with rage. Now he's going to pay me back everything from his inheritance. He has to. Ms. Witt! Judge Caulfield banged his gavel. You're forgetting yourself. But Prue didn't stop. He's always been selfish, always thinking only of himself. And now he wants to rob me and my children of what is rightfully ours. I looked at my daughter, not recognizing in this angry woman the child that Hilda and I had raised with so much love. And suddenly a sense of complete clarity swept over me. I stood up. She robbed her mother, I said clearly and loudly. Silence instantly fell over the courtroom. Prue's face went white, and Judge Caulfield looked at me with unconcealed surprise. What did you say, Professor Glover? He asked. She robbed her mother, I repeated, looking directly at Prue. My wife Hilda, her own mother, when she was suffering from Alzheimer's. Prue collapsed into her seat as if her legs refused to hold her up. Judge Caulfield looked shocked. Professor Glover, this is a serious accusation. Do you have evidence? I nodded. I do, Your Honor, and I am prepared to present it. There was a ringing silence in the courtroom. My 3 words, like a stone thrown into water, created waves of shock spreading throughout the room. Prue's face turned white as chalk, and her eyes read fear, not anxiety or embarrassment, but the genuine fear of a man whose secrets were suddenly on the verge of being revealed. Professor Glover, Judge Caulfield's voice broke the silence. This is an extremely serious charge. I ask you to explain. I took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the moment. What I was about to say could not be taken back. It would forever change not only this trial, but also my future relationship with my daughter, if such a relationship was even possible. Your Honor, I have remained silent for a long time, perhaps too long, but today's events leave me no choice. I looked at Vernon, who looked as surprised as the rest of me. I'd never fully told him about the situation, though he guessed there was more behind my decision to change the will than a simple distrust of Prue's financial responsibility. My wife Hilda was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease 8 years ago. For the first few years, the symptoms were relatively mild. Forgetfulness, occasional disorientation. But each year the condition worsened. The last 3 years of her life were particularly difficult. I felt a lump come up to my throat and paused to gather my thoughts. The year before Hilda died, Prue offered to help manage her mother's finances, said it would be easier for her to handle it since she lived closer to the bank and could visit her mother more often when I was at work. I was grateful for the help. Caring for someone with advanced dementia is exhausting, and any support seemed like a blessing. I saw Prue begin to whisper something to her attorney, who looked increasingly anxious. Prue was given power of attorney to manage Hilda's personal account, which held the savings that the wife had saved up all her life. It was the money she'd set aside from every school teacher's paycheck, her personal rainy day reserve, as she called it, about $120,000. The judge listened intently without interrupting. I began to notice oddities after about 6 months. Hilda, despite her progressive illness, sometimes had moments of lucidity. At one such moment, she asked me why I had let Prue buy a new car with her money. I was puzzled. We hadn't given Prue money for a new car, but Hilda was sure she'd seen her account statement with a big write-off. I remembered that day as clearly as if it were yesterday. We were sitting on the veranda, Hilda in her favorite chair, with a plaid on her lap despite the warm weather. Her eyes, usually clouded by illness, were clear and alert at that moment. I tried to check Hilda's account, but Prue always found excuses. Either the banking system was down, or she'd forgotten to bring the statements, or something else. In the end, I decided to go directly to the bank. There they told me they couldn't provide the information because Prue was the trustee on the account. Objection! Prue's attorney finally found his voice. These charges have nothing to do with Professor Glover's incapacity case. On the contrary, I replied before the judge could react. They have everything to do with it. They explain my daughter's true motives in this lawsuit. Judge Caulfield nodded. I agree with Professor Glover. The objection is overruled. Proceed, Professor. I nodded gratefully to the judge. When Hilda's condition deteriorated to the point where she required constant care, I decided to hire a professional caregiver. Naturally, I wanted to use Hilda's savings for this. It was exactly the sort of thing she'd been saving for. But when I asked Prue to arrange the transfer, she said there wasn't much money left. Supposedly, most of it had already been spent on medication and care. That struck me as odd. Yes, the medications were expensive, but not expensive enough to deplete all the savings in such a short period of time. Plus, basic medical expenses were covered by insurance. I started to insist on seeing my bank statements, and that's when Prue told me that I was too old and confused to understand complex financial matters. That I shocked $8,000 for a vacation in the Bahamas. I pulled folded sheets of paper from my inside jacket pocket and handed them to Vernon, who in turn presented them to the court. These documents are bank statements as well as photocopies of checks with Hilda's forged signature. Not only did my daughter transfer money into her account, but she forged her mother's signature on the checks when she was no longer able to sign the documents herself. The judge scrutinized the papers, his face growing more grim with each page. In a year and a half, Prue withdrew almost $90,000 from Hilda's account. Money my wife had saved all her life, money that should have provided her with decent care in her old age, was spent on luxuries for our daughter, while Hilda herself suffered. I looked at Prue, who sat with her head down, not daring to meet my gaze. When I confronted Prue with this evidence, she didn't deny it. Instead, she made excuses, said that stealing and lying to my face. What did you do with that information, Professor Glover? Judge Caulfield asked. I took a deep breath. Nothing, Your Honor. Hilda was very bad by then. The doctors were giving her a few months at most. I didn't want her last days of life to be marred by the knowledge of what our daughter had done. And despite everything, Prue was still my child. I couldn't bring myself to press charges against her. Instead, I demanded that Prue give up her power of attorney and return at least some of the money. She agreed, but on the condition that I never tell anyone what had happened. She returned $20,000, all she could get, she claimed. The rest had already been spent. I remember that conversation, one of the most painful of my life. We were sitting on the same veranda where years earlier I had comforted little Prue after a fall from her bicycle, where I had taught her to read, where I had made plans with her for the future. Now I was looking at a grown woman who had robbed her ailing mother with cold calculation. Hilda died 3 months after that. I kept my promise and never told anyone what had happened. I even continued to help Prue financially, though every time she asked for money I was reminded of her betrayal. Maybe it was weakness on my part. Maybe I was hoping she'd change, realize her mistake. I shook my head, admitting my naivety. But Prue didn't change. Her demands became more and more demanding, and her attitude toward me became more and more dismissive. When I finally decided to spend some of my own savings on the trip Hilda and I had dreamed of, Prue reacted as if I were trying to steal something from her. And when I refused to give in, she filed this lawsuit trying to declare me incompetent. I sighed, feeling oddly relieved that I'd finally told the truth. I realize, Your Honor, that I should have told you about this sooner. Probably should have pressed charges against Prue the moment I discovered her actions. But I wanted to protect Hilda from pain, and then I just wanted to believe that my daughter could change. I was wrong. Judge Caulfield seemed deeply moved by my story. He scrutinized the documents, occasionally lifting his gaze back and forth between me and Prue. Ms. Witt, he finally turned to my daughter, what do you have to say in response to these allegations? Prue looked cornered. Her face, normally confident and haughty, now expressed a mixture of fear and shame. She looked at her lawyer, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. It was a misunderstanding, she began in a trembling voice. Mom herself wanted me to use that money. She told me so in moments of clarity. I couldn't believe my ears. Even now, cornered by irrefutable evidence, she continued to lie. It's not true, Prue, I said calmly. And you know it. Hilda would never let you spend her life savings on cars and vacations while she needed care herself. You don't understand. Prue's voice grew louder, a hysterical note in it. You've always been so stingy, always controlling every dime. Mom wanted me to live a better life than you. Ms. Witt, calm down, Judge Caulfield said sternly. If you have any evidence of your words, provide it to the court. Otherwise, I recommend that you refrain from making unsubstantiated statements. Prue looked as if she wanted to say something, but Hayward put his hand on her shoulder, restraining her from speaking further. I turned to the court again. Your Honor, I am not seeking revenge. I do not want criminal charges brought against my daughter, although I realize that her actions could fall under the definition of financial abuse of an elderly person and forgery of documents. All I want is to protect the remaining savings I have accumulated through honest labor from a person who has already proven to be financially dishonest. Judge Caulfield listened to me carefully, then addressed both sides. In light of the new circumstances and the evidence presented, I find it necessary to adjourn the hearing for further investigation. I need to scrutinize all the documents and possibly request additional information from the bank. He paused, then added, I should note, however, that Ms. Witt's preliminary claim that Professor Glover is incapacitated appears to me to be unfounded and possibly filed in bad faith. The hearing is adjourned for 2 weeks. During that time, I expect the parties to present any additional evidence they deem relevant. With those words, the judge banged his gavel, and the hearing was adjourned. As I left the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. On the one hand, the weight of years of silence had finally lifted from my shoulders. On the other, I realized that I had just publicly exposed the most painful family secret, and there was no turning back. Prue walked past me without making eye contact, her shoulders slumped and her steps uncertain. She no longer looked commanding or confident. In that moment, she reminded me of the little girl Hilda and I had once loved so much, vulnerable, insecure, in need of guidance. Prue, I called out to her, not knowing what I wanted to say myself. Maybe part of me was still hoping for some kind of reconciliation, some kind of acceptance on her part. She stopped but didn't turn around. Everything you said is a lie, she said quietly but clearly. You've always hated me, always loved Mom more. You want to destroy me, and you made up this story to do it. Before I could respond, she quickly walked away, and her lawyer followed, looking extremely uncomfortable. Vernon walked over to me and put a hand on my shoulder. Are you okay, Rupert? I nodded slowly. I think I am, yes. It was necessary. Why didn't you tell me about all this sooner? I could have been better prepared for the case. I shrugged. To be honest, I hadn't planned on revealing that information. I was still hoping to settle the matter without airing my dirty laundry in public. But when Prue started her tirade in court, I realized I couldn't keep quiet any longer. We walked out of the courthouse and headed for Vernon's car. The day was clear and warm, but I felt like shadows had thickened around me. What now? I asked Vernon as we got into the car. Now we wait. Judge Caulfield is known for his thoroughness. He'll examine all the documents, probably request an examination of the signatures on the checks. But given the evidence presented and your compelling testimony, I'm almost certain he'll dismiss Prue's claim. And what will happen to her? I couldn't help but ask. Despite all the pain she'd caused, she was still my daughter. Vernon sighed. It depends on a lot of factors. If you don't plan to press charges, there probably won't be any legal repercussions for her. On the other hand, if the judge feels she filed the suit in bad faith, in order to gain control of your finances, he could impose legal fees or even a fine on her. I nodded, looking out the window at the streets of Daytona Beach floating by. Strangely, I felt neither triumph nor satisfaction that the truth had finally come out. Only a deep, overpowering sadness at the realization that my relationship with my only daughter was probably ruined forever. You know, I said quietly, part of me always hoped that this was some kind of misunderstanding, that Prue really does care about me, just expresses it in the wrong way, that somewhere deep down inside she's still the little girl that Hilda and I love so much. Vernon threw me a sympathetic look. I understand, Rupert, but you did what you had to do. You protected yourself and Hilda's memory. Sometimes that's all we can do. We pulled up in front of my house. I thanked Vernon and got out of the car, feeling older than ever. Inside the house, the first thing I did was walk over to Hilda's picture on the wall. I told them, honey, I whispered, looking into her smiling eyes in the picture. I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner. Was it just me, or did her eyes look more peaceful in the picture? Perhaps it was just a play of light, but I felt strangely relieved, as if I'd lifted a heavy weight I'd been carrying for too long. I sat back in my chair, feeling suddenly tired. The events of the day had exhausted me emotionally and physically, and yet, for the first time in a long time, I felt a certain calmness. The truth had finally come out, and whatever happened next, I was ready to face it with open eyes. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. It was Vernon. Rupert, I just got a message from the clerk of court. Judge Caulfield has decided to expedite the process and has requested signature examinations and bank statements today. He wants to review the case as soon as possible. Is that good or bad? I asked, not quite understanding the implication. It's good for you. It means the judge has taken your evidence seriously and wants to resolve the situation sooner, but there's something else. What? I heard that Hayward has recused himself from the case. He's no longer representing Prue. This news surprised me. Hayward seemed like an experienced and cynical enough lawyer to defend even the most questionable cases. The fact that he'd recused himself spoke volumes. What does that mean for Prue? It means she'll either have to find a new lawyer or represent herself at the next hearing. Given the nature of the information disclosed, I doubt many attorneys will want to take on her case. I nodded, though Vernon couldn't see it over the phone. Thanks for the information, Vernon. Keep me posted if you find out anything else. Hanging up the phone, I walked over to the window and looked out at the ocean visible in the distance. The waves rolled in with a measured rhythm, a reminder of the constancy of change. Tides and tides, ups and downs, that's how life works. I thought about Prue, how she'd grown up, the moments when I'd noticed the warning signs but ignored them or excused them. I remembered how she was always jealous of things she didn't have, never appreciated what she did have. Perhaps Hilda and I had made mistakes in her upbringing. Perhaps we gave her too much or, conversely, didn't explain the value of hard work and honesty clearly enough. Or maybe it was something deeper, some inner emptiness that Prue was trying to fill with material things that we, as parents, had failed to recognize and heal in time. Anyway, it was too late now to correct old mistakes. Prue was a grown woman, responsible for her decisions and actions. And I was an old man who had finally decided to live my remaining years without the weight of secrets and manipulation. Tomorrow would be a new day, and whatever the future brought, I was ready to face it with a clear mind and a calm heart. The next few days after the court hearing passed like a blur for me. I spent most of my time at home, not wanting to see or speak to anyone. The need to publicly reveal the family shame left me emotionally drained. Every time the phone rang, I flinched, fearing it was Prue, ready to rain more accusations or threats on me. But she didn't call. On Thursday morning, 3 days after the trial, the doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood Esther Quinlan, the travel agent who was helping me plan my trip to Europe. Her usually cheerful face looked worried. "Rupert, I just wanted to make sure you were okay," she said as I invited her in. "I heard about what happened in court." I froze in place. "Heard? From who?" Esther shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. "Well, you know how it is in small towns. News travels fast, especially something so impressive." I sighed and led her into the living room, offering her tea. As I fiddled around in the kitchen, my head boiled with thoughts. Of course, I should have seen this coming. Daytona Beach isn't such a big city, and court hearings are usually open to the public. Someone in the courtroom must have told others, and those others told someone else, and that's how the news spread. "I don't know exactly what you heard," I said, returning with 2 cups of tea, "but I'm afraid most of it is true." Esther nodded, accepting the cup. "I'm very sorry, Rupert. What your daughter did, it's terrible, especially considering Hilda's condition at the time." I felt a lump come up to my throat. Esther was a good acquaintance of Hilda's. They had worked together at a local charity before my wife's illness. "The saddest thing," Esther continued, "is that Prue always seemed like such a caring daughter in public, always talking about how much she loved her mother, how much she did for her." I nodded. This was one of the most painful parts of the whole situation. Prue's double life. To the outside world, she was the model daughter taking care of her sick mother. And behind closed doors, she was stealing from that very mother, taking advantage of her vulnerability. A lot of people in town are shocked, Esther said, sipping her tea. No one expected this from Prue. She always seemed so respectable. What do they say about me? I asked, not sure if I wanted to hear the answer. Do people think I'm an abusive father who publicly dishonored his own daughter? Esther shook her head. Not at all, Rupert. Most people are on your side. They understand how hard it must have been for you to keep that secret for years, and they admire your strength. And frankly, most people have always found Prue a little arrogant. Her reputation in the city wasn't as spotless as she thought it was. That was small consolation. I'd never sought public approval, and I certainly didn't want my family problems to be the subject of town gossip. Still, it was nice to know that people didn't think I was a monster for telling the truth. After Esther left, I decided to check the mail, an activity I'd been putting off for days. Among the flyers and bills, I found an envelope with the logo of the local newspaper, the Daytona Beach News. Inside was a short letter from the editor requesting an interview. In light of recent events in the district court, he wrote, we believe your story could be an important warning to other seniors about possible financial abuse by family members. We would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I crumpled up the letter and tossed it in the trash. The last thing I wanted was to turn a personal tragedy into a public spectacle. I'd told the truth in court, not to punish Prue or gain public sympathy, but because it was the only way to protect myself from her attempts to gain control of my finances. The phone rang again. This time it was Vernon. There's news, he said without preamble. Judge Caulfield got the results of the forensic examination of the signatures. They confirmed that the signatures on the checks were forged. I wasn't surprised, but I still felt a heaviness in my chest. It was one thing to know something with your heart, and quite another to get official confirmation. What does this mean for the case, when I asked? It means Prue's lawsuit will be dismissed, no doubt about it. But there's more to it than that. Vernon paused. Judge Caulfield has contacted the prosecutor's office. He believes Prue's actions may fall under the definition of financial abuse of an elderly or incapacitated person, as well as forgery of documents. I felt my heart clench. You mean a criminal case? Potentially, yes. The prosecutor could decide to press charges based on the evidence presented, even if you don't file it yourself. I closed my eyes, trying to gather my thoughts. Had things really gotten this far? I only wanted to protect myself from a frivolous lawsuit, not send my own daughter to jail. Is there any way to stop this? I asked. Vernon sighed. You can express your reluctance to prosecute your daughter criminally, and that will be taken into consideration. But the decision to press charges rests with the prosecutor. They often act independently in cases like this, especially if they believe it involves protecting vulnerable members of society. After my conversation with Vernon, I sat in silence for a long time, pondering how things had turned out. When I decided to tell the truth in court, I hadn't thought about the long-term consequences for Prue. I just wanted an end to her attempts to control my life. Now I realized that my words could have changed her fate forever. That evening, I decided to go out for a walk on the beach, my usual way of calming my nerves and getting my thoughts in order. The sun was already starting to set, coloring the sky with pink and orange tones. The beach was almost empty except for a few joggers and a couple walking their dog. I walked slowly along the water's edge, letting the cool waves wash over my bare feet. Here by the ocean, problems always seemed less significant, more manageable. The infinity of the horizon was a reminder that our personal dramas were only a tiny part of the larger world. Professor Glover? I heard a voice behind me. Turning around, I saw Liam Knox, a former student who had attended my Shakespeare lectures about 10 years ago. He was now working at a local law firm. Liam, what a surprise! I was hoping to meet you, he said, shaking my hand. I often see you walking around here in the evenings. You've been tracking me? I asked with a slight smile. Liam smiled back embarrassedly. In a way. I heard about what happened in court, and I wanted to talk to you. But I wasn't sure if you'd want visitors to the house. I nodded, understanding his delicacy. Well, you found me. What did you want to talk about? We started walking slowly along the shore. I work for a firm that specializes in elder law defense, Liam began. Tinim. And cases like yours are unfortunately not uncommon. Financial abuse by family members is one of the most common forms of elder abuse. I cringed at the word abuse. I'd never thought of Prue's actions in those terms, though objectively speaking, they fit that definition. The problem is, Liam continued, that many cases go unsolved. Victims are often too ashamed to admit they've been duped by their own children or afraid of destroying family relationships. That you found the strength to tell the truth, even under such pressure, is a very important step. I didn't want to take it public, I said quietly. I kept that secret for years and planned to take it with me to my grave. But Prue left me no choice. Liam nodded understandingly. And that's why I wanted to talk to you. Your story might help other seniors in a similar situation to have the courage to stand up for themselves. Our firm has a legal education project. We hold seminars, we talk about the rights of seniors, how to recognize the signs of financial abuse, and what to do in these situations. I was beginning to see where he was going with this. You want me to speak at a seminar like this? Tell my story? Only if you want to, Liam quickly added. I realize how personal and painful it is, but sometimes by sharing our experiences, we not only help others, but find some healing for ourselves. I pondered his suggestion. On the one hand, the thought of publicly discussing such an intimate family tragedy seemed unpleasant. On the other, if my experience could help someone else avoid a similar situation, maybe it would give meaning to the whole experience. I'll think about it, Liam, I finally replied. Thanks for the offer. We said our goodbyes and I continued my walk, reflecting on the former student's words. Perhaps there was truth in his words. Perhaps by telling my story I could turn a personal tragedy into something useful for others. When I returned home, I found a message on my answering machine from Clarence, Prue's husband. His voice sounded strained and tired. Rupert, it's Clarence. Yeah, I don't know where to begin. Prue told me her version of what happened in court, but then I talked to Hayward and found out the truth. I had no idea what she did with Hilda's money, I swear to you. I always thought our financial problems were solved by her job promotions or bonuses. I just want you to know that I'm on your side on this. I'm worried about the grandkids. Prue is very upset, and I'm not sure she's handling all of this in a healthy way. Please call me back when you can. This message was unexpected. Clarence had always struck me as someone weak and influenced by Prue. The fact that he had the courage to call me and express support spoke volumes. I called him back immediately. Clarence, it's Rupert. I got your message. Rupert, thank you for calling me back. His voice sounded genuinely relieved. I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me after everything that's happened. Of course I want to talk to you. You're my son-in-law and the father of my grandchildren. What's going on with Prue? Clarence sighed. She's in a terrible state. Almost never leaves her bedroom, won't eat, cries or screams all the time. She's afraid she'll be arrested, that she'll lose her job when everyone finds out what she did. And she's afraid the kids will find out the truth. I closed my eyes, imagining my daughter's condition. Despite all the pain she'd caused me, I couldn't help but feel compassion. After all, I was her father. What about the children? Do they know what's going on? No, not completely. They know something is wrong, that mommy is upset, but we haven't told them the details. They're too young to understand the complexity of the situation. I nodded, though Clarence couldn't see it over the phone. My grandchildren, Ethan and Lily, were still children 10 and 8 years old. They didn't need to be held hostage to adult problems. Clarence, I want you to know that I'm not going to press charges against Prue. I've already informed the prosecutor through my attorney. I don't want her to end up in jail. Thank you, Rupert. Clarence's voice trembled. That means a lot. I know Prue did a terrible thing, and I'm not trying to make excuses for her, but she's still the mother of our children, and they need her. I understand. Do you think she'll agree to talk to me? Clarence was quiet for a while. Honestly, I'm not sure. Right now, she's very angry at you for ruining her life. Those are her words, not mine. Maybe after a while, when the emotions have settled down a bit. We talked for a few more minutes, discussing the children and agreeing that I would be able to see my grandchildren regardless of how my relationship with Prue progressed. After talking to Clarence, I sat in my chair, looking at the pictures of Hilda spread across the room. What advice would she give me now? Probably to show compassion, but to remain firm. Hilda had always been kinder than me, but she also knew how to stand up for her principles. The next morning, I decided to meet with the prosecutor in person to express my position on Prue's possible criminal prosecution. Vernon arranged the meeting in his office. The prosecutor, Teresa Wilcox, turned out to be an energetic middle-aged woman with a discerning eye and determined manners. "Professor Glover," she began after formal greetings, "I've reviewed your case file, and the evidence of financial abuse by your daughter seems quite compelling. Forging signatures on checks, unauthorized withdrawals of large sums from the account of a person with dementia are serious offenses." I nodded, feeling uncomfortable that my daughter's actions were being discussed in such terms. "I understand, Ms. Wilcox, and I appreciate your attention to this case. But I want to make it clear that I do not wish to press criminal charges against my daughter." The prosecutor tilted her head, studying me. "May I ask why? What she did had serious consequences for your late wife and for you." I sighed. "Because she's still my daughter, and the mother of my grandchildren. I don't want them growing up knowing their mother is in prison. Besides, Prue's been punished enough already. Her reputation in town is ruined. Her career is in jeopardy. Her marriage is strained to the breaking point." "I understand your feelings, Professor. Many victims of family financial abuse feel the same way, but often the lack of consequences only encourages further abuse." "I'm not talking about the lack of consequences," I objected. "I simply believe that criminal penalties in this case will do more harm than good." Prosecutor Wilcox tapped her pen on the table thoughtfully. "What do you suggest? Perhaps some alternative solution? Community service? Financial counseling? Something to help Prue realize her actions and change, but not ruin her life completely." Teresa Wilcox was silent for a while, mulling over my words. "I can't promise anything concrete, Professor Glover. The decision to press charges is based on many factors, but I will consider your position. In cases of family financial abuse, we sometimes consider a plea agreement with a suspended sentence and mandatory financial counseling, especially if the victim doesn't insist on jail time." I was relieved. It sounded like a reasonable compromise. "Thank you, Ms. Wilcox. I appreciate your understanding." Leaving the DA's office, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, I had done everything I could to mitigate the consequences for Prue. On the other, I wasn't sure she would appreciate my efforts or learn the right lessons from the experience. On the way home, I stopped at a small cafe on the waterfront for a coffee and to gather my thoughts. Sitting at the window overlooking the ocean, I watched the people passing by. Families with children, couples in love, lonely passers-by, each with their own stories, problems, and joys. Suddenly, I noticed a familiar figure across the street. It was Prue. She was standing looking out at the ocean, her shoulders slumped and her posture expressing deep fatigue. Even from a distance, I could see that she looked haggard, her usually impeccable appearance compromised. Her hair gathered in a careless bun, her clothes wrinkled. For a moment, I thought about approaching her, trying to talk to her, but something held me back. Perhaps the realization that neither of us was ready for this conversation, or maybe an instinctive realization that she wouldn't want to see me now when the wounds were still too fresh. I watched her stand for a few more minutes, then turned and slowly walked away. Her gait no longer had the swagger I was used to seeing. She walked like a person carrying an invisible but heavy burden. Perhaps someday we could talk. Maybe someday she would realize that my actions weren't motivated by a desire to hurt her or take revenge. Until then, all I could do was live my life and hope that time would bring, if not healing, at least understanding. The morning of the final trial was surprisingly clear and windless. I woke up before dawn and sat on the veranda for a long time, watching the first rays of sunlight color the sky in soft pink tones. A strange calmness swept over me, not indifference but rather acceptance of the inevitable. Today would conclude one of the most painful episodes of my life, and whatever the judge's decision, I was ready to move on. Vernon picked me up at 9 in the morning. All the way to the courthouse we were silent, not from tension, but from the realization that all the right words had already been said. "Nervous?" he asked when we parked. "Strangely, no," I answered honestly. "I feel like a heavy weight has finally been lifted off of me, regardless of how this ends." Vernon nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude, Rupert. You've done your best. Now it's up to the judge to decide." There were many more people in the courtroom than in previous sessions. Apparently, news of our case had spread throughout the city, attracting the curious. I noticed a few of my former colleagues from the university, neighbors, even a few former students. They nodded at me with sympathy and support. Prue sat in the front row, but no longer with Hayward, but with her new lawyer, a young woman who looked nervous and underprepared. Prue herself had changed noticeably over the past 2 weeks. She had lost weight, dark circles under her eyes, and the usual arrogance in her facial expression had disappeared. She avoided looking in my direction. Clarence sat next to her, tense and awkward. Our gazes met for a moment, and he nodded slightly at me, a barely perceptible gesture of support for which I was grateful. "All rise, court is in session," announced the bailiff, and Judge Caulfield entered the room. After formal greetings, the judge got straight to the point. "Over the past 2 weeks, I have carefully reviewed all of the evidence presented, including signature examinations, bank statements, and medical reports on the condition of Professor Glover and his late wife. Additional material submitted by both sides has also been considered." Judge Caulfield paused, looking around the room. "Before I announce my decision, I would like to ask if the parties wish to make any additional statements." Vernon stood up. "Your Honor, my client, Professor Glover, would like to emphasize that the purpose of these proceedings is not to punish or embarrass his daughter, but merely to protect his right to manage his own funds as he sees fit. He does not seek to escalate the conflict further and wishes the judgment to be the final point in this painful case for the entire family." The judge nodded and turned to Prue's side. The young female attorney stood up nervously. "Your Honor, my client, Ms. Witt, would like to state that her actions were motivated by a genuine concern for her father's well-being. While she recognizes that some of her actions may have been misconstrued, she never intended to harm her parents." Ms. Witt asked the court to consider her sterling reputation in the community and the fact that she is the mother of 2 minor children. I noticed some in the audience exchange incredulous glances. After all the evidence presented, this line of defense seemed not just weak, but almost insulting in its insincerity. Judge Caulfield listened to both statements with a neutral expression, then nodded. "I thank both sides. I am now ready to announce my decision in the case of Witt vs. Glover concerning the declaration of the defendant's incapacity and the appointment of a guardian over his finances." He paused, reviewing his notes, then continued. "Based on a comprehensive review of the evidence presented, including medical reports, testimony, and financial records, the court comes to the following conclusions. First, there is no medical or other objective grounds for declaring Professor Rupert Glover incompetent. All medical reports submitted unanimously confirm that he is fully capable of making rational decisions regarding his finances. Secondly, Professor Glover's decision to spend part of his savings on a trip to Europe appears to be entirely rational and reasonable, given his financial situation, and the fact that this trip was a long-held dream shared with his late wife. Third, the court found overwhelming evidence that it was the plaintiff, Miss Prudence Witt, and not the defendant, who was financially irresponsible and dishonest in using the power of attorney to make unauthorized transfers of funds from the account of her mother, who suffered from dementia, as well as forging her signature on checks. A muffled whisper swept through the hall. I noticed Prue clench her hands into fists, her face turning even paler. "Based on the foregoing," Judge Caulfield continued, "the court dismisses in its entirety Ms. Witt's suit to declare Professor Glover incompetent and appoint her guardian over his finances. Moreover, the court finds that this action was brought in bad faith, with clear self-serving intentions to gain control of the defendant's funds." I felt a tension I hadn't even realized until that moment began to let go of me. Vernon gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Additionally," the judge's voice became sterner, "the court orders Miss Witt to reimburse all court costs, including Professor Glover's attorney fees, signature examinations, and other case-related expenses. The court also admonishes Miss Witt that the evidence presented of her actions regarding Mrs. Glover's account may be grounds for criminal prosecution under the counts of financial abuse of an elderly or incapacitated person and forgery of documents." Prue lowered her head, her shoulders visibly shaking. Clarence hesitantly placed a hand on her back, but she pulled away from his touch. Finally, Judge Caulfield concluded, The court fully supports Professor Glover's right to dispose of his funds as he sees fit, including his decision to travel to Europe and change the terms of his will. Case dismissed. The banging of the judge's gavel put a final end to the story. Around me, people began to stand up, some coming over to show their support. I accepted their congratulations gratefully, but my gaze was fixed on Prue, who hurriedly left the room accompanied by her attorney without looking back. Clarence paused briefly to approach me. Rupert, I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say, Clarence, I replied calmly. I remain calm. You are not to blame for her actions. I know, but I feel responsible. She's my wife, and I should have noticed something, asked where the money for a new car and repairs suddenly came from. I shook my head. Don't blame yourself. Prue has always been able to hide what she wanted to hide. Just take care of the kids now. They need stability more than anything. Clarence nodded, tears in his eyes. They miss you. They ask why Grandpa doesn't come anymore. I'll be sure to visit them as soon as the dust settles. I promise. We hugged briefly, and Clarence hurried to catch up with Prue, who had already left the building. Vernon looked satisfied with the result. A complete victory, Rupert. Couldn't have gone better. I nodded but felt no triumph. Only fatigue and a strange, pinching sense of finality. Yes, I'm grateful for the judge's decision, and especially for your help, Vernon. I couldn't have done it without you. Don't thank me, that's what friends are for. He patted my shoulder. What do you plan to do now? I smiled, feeling light for the first time in a long time. Finish packing. My flight to Europe is in 3 days. A small crowd of reporters met us on the way out of the courthouse. Apparently the case had gotten more attention than I thought. Camera flashes, microphones, persistent questions. Vernon helped me through them, politely but firmly refusing to comment. It wasn't until we were already in the car that I noticed my hands shaking. The stress reaction I'd been so carefully holding back all this time was finally showing. Are you okay? Vernon asked with concern. Yeah, just nervous tension. So many weeks of preparation, waiting, and now it's all over. Not quite over, Vernon remarked cautiously. The DA is still considering a criminal case against Prue. I sighed. I know, but I did everything I could to mitigate her situation. It's out of my control now. On the drive home, we discussed practical matters recovering my interrupted trip, new flight dates, insurance. The mundane details helped ground me, helped me return to normalcy after the emotional turmoil of the past weeks. When Vernon dropped me off at my house, I thanked him again and promised to keep him informed regarding the trip. Once inside, the first thing I did was check my answering machine. There were several messages from friends who had heard about the outcome of the trial and were expressing support, but nothing from Prue. I didn't know what I was expecting. Apology? Remorse? An explanation? Part of me still hoped that today's court decision would be a moment of realization for her, a point from which healing could begin. But I guess I was wrong. Some wounds are too deep. Some bridges burn too thoroughly. I spent the rest of the day doing chores around the house and finalizing travel plans. Esther Quinlan helped me book new tickets and hotels, reconstructing much of the original itinerary with only minor changes. You look different, Rupert, she remarked when we were done with the booking. More calmer. I pondered her words. I guess I do feel different, like I've dropped the heavy backpack I've been carrying for years without realizing it myself. Esther smiled understandingly. Secrets are like that. They weigh more than we realize, especially secrets we keep out of love or a sense of duty. In the evening, I stepped out onto the veranda with a glass of whiskey and my tattered atlas of Europe. The sun was setting over the ocean, coloring the sky with the same hues I had observed in the morning, as if the day had come full circle, returning to the beginning, but in a new capacity. I opened the atlas to the Paris page, marked with Hilda's bookmark. Her neat handwriting in the margins indicated the places she wanted to visit. The Musée d'Orsay, the Luxembourg Gardens, the little cafes in the Latin Quarter. I'll spend enough time there to visit all those places for both of us. Turning the pages, I came across a photograph I'd used as a bookmark for the section on Rome. It showed Hilda and me and little Prue, she's about 5 years old, standing on the beach, all three of us smiling at the camera, happy and carefree. I looked at that photo for a long time. at my daughter's face, still untouched by the greed and calculation that showed up later. What happened to that smiling girl? At what point did she turn into a woman capable of stealing from her own mother and trying to declare her father incapacitated for money? Was it our fault? We didn't teach her enough to appreciate the right things. Or was it something within her herself that we couldn't change, no matter how hard we tried? I didn't know the answers to these questions and probably never will. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need them anymore. Prue had made her choice. I had made mine. Our paths had parted, perhaps forever, and that had its own sad but final truth. I carefully placed the photograph back into the atlas and closed it. This stage of my life was over. Now a new chapter was opening before me, full of new places, impressions, opportunities. I would go on the journey that Hilda and I had dreamed of for so many years, and I would live life to the fullest without looking back on past hurts and disappointments. The night before I left, I dreamt of Hilda, not sick and weak as she had been in the last months of her life, but young and radiant as I had met her more than 50 years before. In the dream, we were walking along the Seine embankment, holding hands, and she was smiling at me with that special smile I love so much. "You did the right thing, Rupert," she said. "You're free now." I awoke with the first rays of the sun, feeling surprisingly calm. The dream had already begun to melt away, but the feeling of Hilda's presence, her approval, stayed with me. The day of departure was clear and warm. I finished the final preparations, checked my tickets and papers, made sure the house was in order for the time I was away. Vernon was to take me to the airport in an hour. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. Opening it, I saw Clarence and his two children, Ethan and Lily, on the doorstep. "Sorry for the sudden visit," he said, embarrassed. "The kids found out you were leaving today and really wanted to say goodbye." I was touched to the core. "Sure, come on in." Ethan and Lily rushed toward me with hugs. They had grown since the last time I saw them. Ethan was already almost reaching my shoulder. "Grandpa, are you really going to Europe?" he asked excitedly. "Yes, I really am. To Paris, Rome, Venice, and other cities." "Will you bring us anything?" Lily asked, her eyes so similar to Hilda's, glowing with curiosity. "I will," I smiled, feeling my heart clench with tenderness for these children who were innocent of adult conflict. We spent half an hour talking about my upcoming trip. I showed them the atlas, told them about the places I planned to visit. They listened with genuine interest, asked questions, and shared their own travel fantasies. When it was time to say goodbye, I hugged each of them. "I will miss you," I said, not hiding my emotions. "And I'll be sure to show you all the pictures when I get back." "We'll miss you too, Grandpa." Lily hugged me tightly. "Come back soon." Clarence took the kids to the car, then came back to talk to me alone. "Prue knows we're here," he said quietly. "She didn't mind. I think it's her way of making the first move." I nodded, not wanting to give the gesture any more meaning than he had. "Thank you for bringing the kids. It means a lot to me." "For them, too. They love you, Rupert. Whatever happens between you and Prue, please don't disappear from their lives." "Never," I promised firmly. After they left, I finished packing with a new sense of peace. No matter how difficult my relationship with Prue had been, my grandchildren were still a part of my life, and they were a thread of hope worth holding on to. When Vernon arrived to take me to the airport, I was fully prepared. Looking around the house one last time before I left, I felt no longing or regret, only anticipation of new discoveries. At the airport, Vernon gave me a big hug goodbye. "Enjoy every moment, Rupert. You've earned it." "Thank you for everything." Walking through passport control, I looked back one last time. Vernon was still standing there waving. I waved back, then resolutely moved forward. On the airplane, settling into my seat and looking out the porthole at Daytona Beach receding, I pulled a small photograph of Hilda from the inside pocket of my jacket. "We're going to Paris, darling," I whispered, touching her smiling face with my fingers. "Just as promised." The plane lifted off the ground, gaining altitude, and I felt my spirit lift with it, freed from the weight of past hurts, ready for new horizons.